There we are, folks. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam, ala rasulillah. So we're here now, Middle Ground Podcast, episode 39. Wow, 39. And today, inshallah, I think we want to talk about vigilantism in light of what happened with UnitedHealthCare whack job by a potential whack job. I don't know. We'll see. Was he a whack job or was he just doing his duty? I don't know. I know that the public sentiment has definitely treated the guy like he was doing almost like a public service, right? And I've even seen, Muslims kind of sympathetically leaning towards, I'm not saying that I condone violence, but kind of thing, right? So what do we do? Like, how do we make sense of living in a world that will not only often defy temporarily systems of justice and even defy all sense of, good common sense and whatnot. But how do we reconcile that frustration with taking matters into our own hands?
Right.
How do we do that? So, yeah, vigilantism. Now, what's interesting about the word vigilante, because that's what the guy was. He's a vigilante, right?
Sure.
But in some ways, was he a vigilante? In that the word vigilante itself is an interesting word. You know me. We got to go on a little trip now, get out our dictionary and go on a little trip about the word vigilante. While it's popularly used as somebody that takes the law into their own hands, the actual meaning of vigilante comes from vigilant.
Okay.
Right, to remain vigilant.
Sure.
So it comes from both a Latin and like a French and then ultimately a Latin root that is rooted in being watchful. So it's somebody that is like a sentry, somebody that is watchful. Right, yeah, like you're a watcher, the vigilant man. So the vigilante, right, the vigilant man, somebody that is alert and aware. But there's nothing in that initial etymological root that should suggest that one can then take the next step of taking the law into one's own hands. And so that's why I said, how do we deal with this? Certainly, and I would even say myself, I'm not going to try to act like I'm on any kind of high horse here. When I saw that it was this, CEO of UnitedHealthCare that got, gunned down in the street, I wasn't like, yeah, that's what that guy deserves. Because I don't really know anything about that person in particular,
Sure.
And I'm sure 99.9% of us also didn't know anything about that guy until he was, infamously gunned down in the street.
Sure.
But the fact that he is a CEO for, I think, is the world's largest healthcare corporation, is paid an exorbitant amount of money. And then we know the practices of these corporations, of which, of course, now more scrutiny shined on that, and certain things have come to light that, and when we say he, who knows whether or not he really was directing that. After all, he's the CEO. So probably, some minion 8 levels below him was probably doing this. But
Sure.
Apparently, that's the thing though. If you're the CEO, you want to get paid, the big bucks and have the title. Well, you are responsible for what your corporation does. And so apparently they were working on an artificial intelligence tool, an AI tool that would do the screening process for people's claims, for insurance claims,
Got it.
of which it then very promptly apparently denied. It had like a 90% denial, rate, where basically just almost everybody across the board was getting denied. And apparently it had like an abysmal track record in terms of like how, accurate it was. And so certainly this did shine light upon an industry that has a tremendous amount of callousness to it, that has turned an unsympathetic eye towards the suffering of countless numbers of people, and has probably denied countless numbers of people care that might have been either life preserving or however that it is. And so I think when this happened to this particular figure, I think a lot of people understandably did not have a lot of sympathy for the victim. That being said, can we as Muslims condone people going the next step and just taking the law into their own hands?
Yeah. Well, let's paint a more defined picture. So some people on Twitter, and let's just forget about them too, on X, had posted, "Hey, my mother," or I was injured, and they denied I had cancer, and
right,
X, Y, and Z. So apparently, some live actors that have been affected by this insurance seemingly had a legitimate, gripe.
Yes,
And
definitely.
so to your question, hey, if that happened to my mom, what would I do?
Yeah.
And then we find out that there is a whole manifesto to, like you said, the minions. This is how you go about denying them. Get out of this claim. Get out of that claim. So they had a whole,
although I think it's worth, I'm suspicious anytime we have, though, any kind of, spectacle that takes place right in public, because everything now seems so manufactured and artificial and staged, that there's a number of things about if he is the perpetrator that kind of don't add up and makes me kind of scratch my head. So, like, as you said, right, if that was my mom, what would I do? Okay, certainly I'm not in a position of great financial means that if my mom needed medical care that I could, I would have the means on my own. So my frustrations might be a bit more understandable. But actually, this kid comes from an extremely well-to-do family.
Right.
Not just because he got into an elite university, but also just the family itself has great connections, is a very financially successful family. And so I'm a little suspicious that if his mother did indeed have a particular medical condition, and that's where I'm not sure because I haven't had that confirmed, but that's part of that's the urban myth that's being kicked around now that I haven't seen that confirmed. But part of the urban myth going around is that his mom needed some type of health care and may have been denied. And my thing is like, okay, even if your mother was denied, it seems like your family would be in a position of which they would be able to shoulder that burden a heck of a lot more than the average person. So there is a part to the story here that is maybe not 100% adding up. I'm a little suspicious of that, right? That's what I mean. I'm not really.
Well, apparently Luigi, the suspect, his whole family is actually in the or connected somehow to insurance.
Well, I mean, and that's what I'm saying. They're very well connected, and they're a very financially successful family. And so when you hear this thing like, oh, he was motivated because his mom needed medical care and she was denied, and so he did this sort of revenge thing upon this guy, I'm like, that doesn't 100% add up. I'm not really sure if that, and so even if it does, let's say half of it is true, his mom had a medical condition, why would you feel as a person whose family has great financial means and other kinds of contacts, why, what would cause you to just go do that? So that's what I'm saying. I'm kind of a little bit suspicious.
Sure.
I'm black, so I'm naturally suspicious of everything, right? And then the other part is that right around this time, even though technically it does predate this, but it seems to have ramped up conveniently at the same time, we have all these drones flying around in the air. And so, people are saying like, oh man, they're doing this to somehow it's part of the distraction, which I'm not saying it's not a distraction. I just don't see how it fits in with this, but I love it. Hey, I'm a big fan of conspiracy theory. So
yeah. Well, they moved us to the net. Hey, now look over here.
Yeah. I mean, if that's what it is, then okay, fine. I like I said, I love conspiracy theories.
Right.
I'm black, so by nature I am conspiratorial, right? It kind of have to be. And so there's that part of it where like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. The other part that however I do some wheels start to kick in my head is that there is a new kind of, and I don't really like to evoke race a lot, but I do think there is a new kind of whiteness emerging in our time where you see white kids of privilege, whether that is higher echelon privilege like this kid or just by proxy of being white, having some sort of, social privilege capital, are electing to actually reject that kind of privilege. And that's why we saw during the past year that some of the most active and ardent protesters against Israel and protesting for the Palestinians were actually white people, right? Young white kids on college campuses, going out there and protesting. And I think there might potentially be a dovetail between this kid going to a place like Harvard, an elite school,
Right.
that maybe this sort of rhetoric of, where you might be for the first time in an environment where you might be encouraged, to reject those kinds of social privileges. Because there's just a number of things that the math doesn't quite add up, at least in the way that the narrative has been given to us, right? And so along with that though, okay, fine. If let's say he was motivated by the fact that maybe he did come from a family of privilege and maybe his mother's condition caused him to become aware of how other people are, almost in a kind of like Ted Kaczynski kind of way, which obviously was a person of influence upon him. I mean, he wrote a review about Ted Kaczynski, AKA the Unabomber. And Ted Kaczynski himself seems to bear a number of similar resemblances to this kid. I don't think Kaczynski had the same family that was as well-to-do as, Mangione. Only reason why I can remember his name is Mangione is because of Chuck Mangione, who had that famous song in the 70s, playing a flugelhorn, right? It feels so good or whatever. If I can find that one, I'll play it. Oh man, Chuck Mangione back in the day. So that's why I can remember the last name Luigi. Yeah, that's all. But no, Kaczynski though was, a child prodigy, super smart, math genius, and did go into, those elite institutions. Now it's not really conspiratorial. It was known that he did have something to do with like MK Ultra, and perhaps something was done to Kaczynski while he was there, along with just the sort of tract of that education that, and I think this is sometimes people forget, Marxism has its violent side to it, right? There's the kind of like Marxism of, let's unionize and protest and, that kind of thing. But a lot of the movements around the world, like I don't know if people are old enough to remember, the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, right? And so a lot of those movements in Latin America that were anti-colonial movements were heavily Marxist, and they all had a wing of them that were all about like armed guerrilla, resistance. So Is that what happened to Ted Kaczynski? Did he go to Harvard? Did he get exposed to kind of some radical Marxist ideology, and then on top of it, some mind control, MK Ultra type stuff that caused him to flip out? Or did this kid just, did he just have a big chip on his shoulder and, read some Ted Kaczynski and then, wanted the attention? It begs to, but at the end, that's why I wanted to, we can speculate on those things sort of endlessly. But I thought the more interesting part was, regardless of what those motivations are, is it a legitimate impulse as a Muslim to take the law into your own hands?
Right.
It's one thing to be vigilant. It's another thing to become a criminal. So in some ways, it's like we've almost misappropriated this word vigilante, because its true root has nothing to do about disobeying the law. If anything, it's actually quite the opposite. It's about being vigilant against that which breaks the law, but that does not deputize one then to, a license to kill, kind of James Bond license to kill. You can just go take people out.
Sure. So just a little adding to the definition here, the idea of, or this modern term, is that someone would operate outside the boundaries of the law, driven by personal belief about justice or frustration with existing legal systems, where the action may aim to uphold morality to protect the community. And that's that fuzzy line. My morality, or as a Muslim too, there's this fuzzy line. Well, I might take the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, fool.
Yes.
That's to my mom, man. Right? And so, you one could get overwhelmed with emotions, and if we don't really have a in-depth understanding of our Sharia, then that line gets a little blurred here. Why not? I might take some ayah out of context and take matters into my own hands.
Right.
And very well understood. No, and I do want to go to prison, or I will get shot for this. Or I will, right? I mean, completely,
right
in it. So, what can we say about this?
So, one, there's a verse that Allah talks about in the Quran where He tells the Prophet ﷺ to have sabr as to the hukm of your Lord. So, فَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ رَبِّكَ. Now, what's interesting is that this verse is revealed at a time in which the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims are dealing with people harming them and even killing some of the Muslims. So they're being persecuted. But the initial response, even going up until the middle years of Islam, right, the early middle years, is فَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ رَبِّكَ. Have sabr, meaning not just have patience, but endure the commandment of your Lord, meaning that Allah has ordained that these things will happen, and you will suffer casualty, you will suffer loss, you will even suffer loss of life. And even initially, He does not give the green light to the Muslims, even to the Prophet ﷺ himself, to have armed response. And so we see that, okay, later on in Revelation, Allah indeed does, but then even that has some conditions put on it. But never does the Quran advocate for just wanton violence, right? And so one of the things that we accept in this life, and indeed one of the pillars of our creed as Muslims, is that we believe in the qadr of Allah. We believe in the decree of Allah, that Allah can decree things that will, from our point of view, from our perspective, will appear to be evil. So we have to believe in al-qadr wa sharruhu wa khayruhu. We believe in the evil and the good of it. And so, indeed, we can expect that in this life, we may encounter, or things may be done to us that will indeed be unpleasant, evil, But that does not in and of itself demand that we respond as individual actors. And in fact, the Quran heavily, in those verses that we studied last year, the Quran heavily incentivizes people to either find some means of mediation.
Yeah.
So let's say somebody is killed. The Quran does allow a life for a life, potentially in some cases. Okay, fine. You can have, a person murder somebody. There is capital punishment in Islam for some cases, but the Quran goes on to advocate saying, like, look, there's also an option where a person could pay a fine, what we call blood money. They could pay a fine, or even a higher moral level above that is to be able to forgive or to come to some type of resolution that does not perpetuate that violence to go forward. Right. This is unquestionably the perspective that the Quran advocates. So this is why I'm suspicious from multiple angles on this story, that if his mother did have a condition, one, you had tremendous means. Your family had tremendous, like you individually, Luigi, who knows what his personal finances were like. But apparently your family had tremendous resource, at least far more than the average person would have. Yeah. And so I don't find your response to gunning the person down in the street acceptable. It also begs the idea that, or I'm suspicious because you knew that you would get caught. Like, you know that eventually you're going to get caught in a state that is like literally, bristling, with surveillance. Sure. It's very unlikely, almost impossible to think that you would get away with it. Therefore, that has to be part of the plan, is then the attention and the thing that will come from this. And ironically, like if you claim to have read Kaczynski, so it appears that in some of Kaczynski's later thinking and writing is that, I don't think he had remorse for necessarily killing anybody, because I don't know, dude, he could have been a sociopath. Again, who knows what the CIA or MK Ultra did to his mind. But the idea that it didn't achieve what he wanted, right? Kaczynski kind of admits this later on. It's like, okay, I wanted people to go back to live a much more natural life. This is talking about Ted Kaczynski now, right? And because they were this, technological, tyrannical technological society we have now is destroying everything, then, that's why he had targeted people that had like wood in their name. And like he was trying to send this message. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, his actions basically blinded people from really being able to see anything beyond the killings other than just killing. So he kind of, people got lost in the sauce of the violence of it. Well, if you've read Kaczynski, you would know that tactic didn't work. And so it also appears to be more like a temper tantrum, potentially. Like when have you ever seen revolution change from an individual murdering another person? It's just not, this is just something that doesn't happen. And so I can be sympathetic towards people wanting changes to happen, but just murdering one individual, this is just about your own nafs. Yeah. This is not going to change anything. And this is, I think, the detriment we have now with the people that have been in some way stripped of the fitrah, stripped of that natural inclination to believe in Allah, which is then to believe in the revelation of Allah, which is to accept some things in life are going to happen that I don't like. And I have to have sabr, right? I have to endure them. فَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ رَبِّكَ.
Yeah. Yeah. This would be a internal conflict, because the mindset could operate in another way, not just, I mean, we don't even get to hear his whole story.
I mean, it's true. We haven't had a chance to, and that's why the other part of me still is suspicious.
Yeah. But let's just say, we have a different avatar here who, poor, whatever you want to call it, could not afford, the means to take care of a family member. So many are in this situation. Family member dies. because of the hands of who he may seem or believe, he or she. It's the healthcare system. It was this particular doctor. It was this whole situation here. You know what? These people, here's the mindset. Not only for myself, but as a vigilante, I need to protect other people from this.
Right.
Why do they need to go through this too?
Right.
We need to teach these people a lesson today.
Yeah.
So there was an influencer, and I don't want to say an influencer. He's more the old man, Cliff High.
Oh boy, here we go.
He brought out a very interesting thing from his web bio. You got to filter through all of these guys, all of their works here. But he said there'll be a time where you'll see after COVID that there'll be a lot of vigilante acts because people will say, you did this to my mother, my son, my daughter, my friend, my
right.
You did this, because that's all they can see. This doctor, this person, this company, and they're going to take matters into their own hand because they feel that the whole justice system has failed them anyways.
Yes.
So that's a interesting revelation that he mentioned.
Right.
If you will.
That's true, but think about the Quran acknowledges, because Allah Ta'ala huwa mudabbilul amr, right? He's the one that controls all of the pieces on the chessboard. Mm-hmm. So Allah creates the world, He creates the people that will populate this world, and He says what? وَمِنْكُمْ كَافِرٌ وَمِنْكُمْ مُؤْمِنٌ. Some of you will be a kafir, will be a bad person, and some of you will be a mu'min, some of you will be a good person. So this is already, and none of this is beyond Allah Ta'ala's ultimate control.
Yeah.
But then Allah says about, as it relates to the topic of justice, to adala, this is what كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ. All of you Muslims, all of you believers are the best ummah brought out for mankind, not the best individual. This, I think, also, his actions, Mangioni's actions, I think, are also emblematic of the zaman and nafs. It's like the age of the nafs, the age of the ego.
Yeah.
And the Quran speaks always about social change in the voice of the plural, in the voice of the group. Now, when it talks about personal rectification, فَمَنْ آمَنَ فَآمَنَ لِنَفْسِهِ, whoever believes in terms of what's going to be your salvation in the hereafter, then yes, we all have our own personal obligation to believe in Allah, repent to Him, worship Him, individually follow the Prophet ﷺ, and on and on. But collectively, when it comes to the islah of majmu'ah, to the rectification of society, the establishing of justice, Allah speaks in the voice of the group. So you are the best group, ukhrijat linnas, brought out for all of humanity. What do you? Ta'muruna bil ma'rufi. You all have to speak, right? It's the ummah, it's the mu'minun, the muslimun that are going to speak collectively about commanding people to good. Murdering a dude walking down the street. And I'm not saying that the guy is a good person. Obviously, you work for an evil, I would even say you work for an evil corporation. Right?
Industry.
and you work for an evil corporation and as it currently exists, an evil industry, right? I mean, obviously, health care as a theoretical should be a good thing, right? But as it stands, yes, obviously it's horrible. But the Quran speaks from a different perspective. It talks about doing things as a group. Because number one, no matter how smart I think I am not a prophet. And so one, you need the collective genius to come together. Two, the way that you change society is through collectiveness. And I think this is where there is something that perhaps Marx was, onto. Of course, he's not a prophet, and nor was he following revelation, so he ultimately, goes off course. But that's how you do it. The second one was what? وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنَ الْمُنْكَرِ, that you will then prohibit evil collectively. Mm-hmm. It's a whole different thing if I go put on my Batman mask and go out and beat people individually to a pulp that I feel that aren't following the law. I mean, that might be okay for a cartoon or a comic book, but for reality, that's, number one, I'm not going to be able to do that. I mean, I might be able to beat a couple people up, but at some point, I'm going to get beaten up and taken out. It's just not going to happen.
Sure.
What you need is for the hearts of a collective of people to shift.
Right.
And so this is why Allah talks about what tanhawna 'anil munkari, right? All of you have to be concerned with the goodness of society. And then the third is what tu'minuna billah. That third, you also, you believe in Allah. You believe in the qadr, you believe in the good, the bad, you believe that there's a hereafter, you believe that there's a day of judgment of which any evil that was perpetuated, there will be retribution for it. If there is any suffering due to that, people will be recompensed and on and on. I believe in that. So, in my ability to have sabr, right, to have patience, that is greatly encouraged and sustained by a much broader overarching concept than, I'm ticked off because somebody did something to my mom. Now, I'm not saying like somebody breaks in your house that I'm going to have this kind of theoretical conversation. No, trust me, you'll be going straight to the cemetery, right? But I'm talking about something like this. But I mean, we have to take our own responsibility as Americans. I mean, why do we have a system that clearly does not obey the wishes of the American people? We're sold this mythology about vote, get out and vote, and democracy, and this and that. And yet we have a system, what we were just talking about. You got people like Nancy Pelosi that have been in and she's not the only one. She's just like the easy, low-hanging fruit to critique. But all of them, once they get in there, they never leave. And then the tendrils get into them, the tentacles get wrapped around them from industry, and this is what we're left with, right? And we are lulled to sleep and have been content to moan about it and cry proverbially in our beers about it. But, there's a football game tonight, there's a boxing match on, there's another movie coming out, there's this, there's a sale going on. I'm saying this is what I also don't like about the people that are, and again, when I saw it, naturally, it invokes these things naturally, but when you take a step back and you really think about it, okay, what's going on here? No, we bear the responsibility for why our society looks the way that it does.
Sure.
If there's any truth to this being some sort of elected reality, then why are we not putting people in there with those through the electoral process, and then changing the laws themselves? Why is it that we have these people that can stay in Senate for the rest of their life? Why have we not elected people to run in there that will go there? And again, this is the problem. It's not going to be easy to do that. I don't mistake what I'm saying is that, we should just do this and everything will be fine. I acknowledge that is actually a very difficult upward fight and an upward, road to go. But that's the only way to do it, because shooting people in the street isn't going to change a damn thing.
Sure. So I think the ideas, all of these fantastical ideas that we have, either committing that type of act or thinking that on the other extreme that maybe law will help.
Yes.
So there's this weird thing, but if we have the Islamic model, we've digested it, understand it, then we have something to work with. So the idea here then, due process should have been able to play out.
Right.
So as Muslims, one thing I go back to, because there's these case studies throughout our deen, and how did the Sahaba handle it? Now, I always go back to with Ali, when he had the people of Fitna embedded, and he knew it.
Yes.
They're embedded in his army. They're the ones who had killed Uthman. Some of the leaders are right there. And they're like, why aren't you killing them right now? He said, man, because I got to sort all this stuff out first, because everybody has a different level. Just
killing everybody, right. Just off with their heads. I mean, that might
have not have done nothing.
Right, exactly.
We need due process here. So
the other thing is look, to be honest, again, here's a kid that comes from a political family, a financially well-off family that has, again, far more resources than, say, you or I. I ain't got no resources, neither way. Forget about it, right? So why didn't you exercise those resources to work towards changing the system? To be honest, you've squandered what Allah gave you by shooting this person, and now you will just rot in a jail cell for the rest of your life, and this will go in and out of the news cycle, especially today with people's attention span like a squirrel. Within a few months, this will all go away. It might circle back around when you get sentenced, and then that's it, and we're back. And they've already got to do that. I went up and looked today. UnitedHealthCare CEO. They got Andrew Whitty up on there. He's the CEO now of UnitedHealthCare Group. Right. They already replaced him. Yeah. Right? And he's smiling too. I'm sure they got this thing right here. Yeah. Let me see if I can put this up for the people, because I mean, this to me is absolutely hilarious. That I just got to see if I can put this up here. Let's see. We got to go application. And I'm just going to put Chrome. Yeah, you guys can see here. And I'm going to bring it down here. I mean, look at, that's it. Like homeboy, he's the CEO now. Yeah. And of course, now when you the irony is that when you type in UnitedHealthCare CEO, of course, you see the news listed on one side. So you got Mangione over there. But then on the right side, Andrew Whitty. Like, you've already failed. You cannot defeat the system like this, partly because this goes against the sunnah of Allah. This goes against the divine, prime directive of how to do things. Yeah. So I really feel like, I understand people and their emotionally charged response to it, and knowing how evil of an industry, health insurance is and big pharma. I get all that. And I am sympathetic towards that rage, but we are not directing our attention in a way that's going to garner barakah and, najah, like success. It's not going to garner any blessing, and it's not going to garner much success.
All right, let me throw a curveball.
Oh, here we go.
Now, can we do like?
Let me get my 3D printer so I can get my strap ready.
I think in the Bronx. Remember in the 70s or so, the Red Berets.
Yes. The Guardian Angels.
Guardian Angels.
Yeah.
Well, can't the Muslims do something like that, bro? Why not?
I mean, I think that
So, well, what were they? They were basically taking care of the neighborhood. There was this group of individuals.
Yes, they were being vigilant.
They're being vigilant, but they weren't going out killing people.
Right. Again, going back to the original meaning of vigilante is a vigilant person, not a violent person. That word has been kind of bastardized.
Right.
It's been, it really has been completely taken away from it. Like, that's why when we have things called a vigil, or like, a person who is vigilant. It means what? You're watchful. It doesn't mean a person that's going to go out and, start shooting out the block.
But they were trying to call them that.
They were. And they were trying to say, look, our block is already being shot up by the criminals. We're trying to go out and be vigilant and cut that, right? So I think that, sure, in the spirit of what they were doing. But again, I think that is what Allah is saying in those verses, that you collectively have to call to good, and collectively have to prohibit evil, and collectively promote belief in a hereafter. Right? Those are the major big ticket items that will direct you to success, right? And even then, you have to accept that at the end of the day, Allah still may decree something horrible to happen to you. And you have to accept that, well, you know what? I have to suffer through it. And any wrong that is done to me, if I believe in Allah and I believe in His Messenger and I try to do good and so on, then I will be relieved at that. Like the person, the hadith that says that, the person in this life that suffered greatly will be dipped into the waters of paradise, and they will say, I didn't suffer. I didn't suffer at all. And the person that delighted in everything from this dunya will be dipped in the fire for just a moment. They will say, I've never enjoyed anything, right? So again, this is what it means to really have Iman, right? To, because Iman should make you safe, as we talked about in the Arabic class. You should be the mu'min, You should be safe from the fire, but other people should be safe from you as well, right? And that there's a much greater efficacy to truly root out evil if we do it from the group perspective. You know, I mean, as they would say, you can't shoot us all, you can't get us all, right? So, you know, if you work as a group, right? I mean, I think that maybe, if anything, to tie it back to the Batman thing, is that in the Christopher Nolan trilogy, right? So you have Batman that becomes this individual crime fighter, but then eventually he himself ages to a point, right, where he can't get out there and just beat the pulp out of everybody, and that society begins to kind of crumble again. And so when he comes back in the third movie finally to fight Bane, right, to fight the villain, he has to come back and enlist the support of the Gotham City police and the people in general, right? And so they go back and fight, right? So, you know, in some ways, Nolan understood that, you know, it's interesting as a origin story and it's interesting as a comic book, but if you want to try to portray it in a more realistic light, no individual is going to do this, right? And there is an interesting hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, that's related to us by Abu Huraira, in which he said, you know, إِذَا قَالَ الرَّجُلُ هَلَكَ النَّاسِ هُوَ أَهْلَكُهُم. That if somebody comes to you and says like, oh man, you know, we're ruined, everything is bad, you know, the people are ruined, then know that that person is the most ruined of them all, right? And so when you get somebody that feels like things are so bad that they just have to start individually shooting people, then that's a person that is the most ruined of all people.
Well, you brought up the other hadith about Ali, when he had the man on the ground.
Yes,
spat on him.
Exactly. He was fighting him, got him down, and he was ready to do the coup de grace on him, right? Yeah.
So we talked about the niyyah there. He was able to distinguish. He's now about to kill him for himself.
Yeah, he said, I was fighting him initially for Allah, but when he spat at me, I was going to kill him for myself. And then he walked away, right? And so, yeah, that's what I mean, that I think that this is why, because there is no, la nabiyya ba'dahu, right? There is no prophet after him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so our process of shaping society, which includes having to rejuvenate and resuscitate society from time to time, will always be a collective process. It will never be some individual movement, right? It will always be, I mean, I know people talk about the Mahdi and so on, but okay, the way that we will deal with things, either until the return of Sayyidina Isa, right, is that we will have to do things collectively, right? And this ensures that society will not fall apart.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, and that's the beauty about Islam. We have a mechanism and a network where an individual can't talk to somebody about this matter.
Yes.
Where, you know what, brother, man, this thing happened to my mom, my dad, or whatever.
And that's the problem. He's like off in his own little silo. This is why you need to be part of a community. So that if you are having those moments, we all have that, right? Oh, I'm going to go kill that guy. I'm going to, like, nah, man, you know, hold on a minute, right? You're going to regret that, you know? So, yeah. That being said, though, man, I'm still a big fan of this Batman music. Yeah, so I'm going to let the Batman music.